How's it going, guys? In this video we're going to be talking about the removal and reinstallation of the wheels on your Ninja 1000 or Z1000SX. This video is going to be focused on the removal and reinstallation of the rear wheel, but you can check the link above or the link in the description for the video on how to do the same for the front wheel. The first step with the wheel removal is going to be to get your bike up on stands. And if you're just doing the rear wheel, all you need is a rear stand. But remember that if you're taking the front wheel off, you need to get the bike up on the rear stand before you put it up on a front stand. You never put the bike up on a front stand by itself because it's not stable. All right, the first thing we're going to do is loosen the two nuts on the torque link bar. It's kind of hard to see because my stand is in the way, but there's the one on the left, and then here's the one on the right. And we don't need to take them off all the way, we're just going to back them off a little bit so that the torque link bar is a little bit loose. All right, so we're going to use the 14mm wrench and just loosen these up a bit. All right, now we're going to take off the retaining ring. There's one on each side. And you could probably use a pair of needle nose pliers or maybe even just a screwdriver to get this out. This is actually just a bike chain tool. And all you need to do is squeeze and pop it out. Okay, now we're going to take off the one on the left side of the bike. All right, now we're going to pull off the rear caliper, and to do that you just need to take out these two 6mm Allen key bolts. All right, and you don't want to let the caliper hang by the brake hose, so I just put a zip tie through it and hung it from my stand so it's out of the way. All right, now we're going to loosen the two axle pinch bolts. There's one on each side, and to do that you'll need an 8mm hex key. And these don't need to come all the way out, they just need to be loose. The next step is going to be to slide the axle forward, just as if you were adjusting the chain. And basically what we're trying to do is create more chain slack so that we'll be able to slide the chain over the sprocket. Before you do that, it's probably worth just making a note of where your chain adjuster currently is set. And you'll see these little triangle-shaped notches and also this line on the swing arm. And so you'll just want to remember where this line lines up with these little notches on this eccentric adjuster. So to do that, I'm just going to take a picture. And you'll want to check your chain slack again anyway, but this will at least help you get it back to where it was. So then what we're going to do is use a 12mm Allen key and rotate the chain adjuster so that the wheel moves forward. All right, now there's a lot of slack in the chain. And then the next step is going to be to pull this axle out. Okay, to get the axle out, you'll need an 8mm hex key for the left side to hold it steady, and then a 12mm hex for the right side. And so we're just going to hold this here, and then put the one on the left side on the axle, and that's the side that's actually going to come out. So this is the axle nut from the right side of the bike. And there you can see where the 12mm socket goes. Okay, now I'm going to pull off the chain. You just get it to the side of the sprocket and rotate the wheel, and it'll come right off. And I'm going to put a rag over the swing arm so I don't scratch it out. All right, to get the axle out, all you have to do is push it from the right side. It'll slide right out, and then I was just using my foot underneath the tire to help support the weight as I pulled the axle out, and then the tire just comes right down. All right, so now we're ready to reinstall the rear wheel. Before we bring the wheel up, we need to put a little bit of grease on the axle, and you're going to go about 1 centimeter in from the threads, and then go about 7 centimeters more than that. So we're going to put grease kind of right in this area. And this is just a white lithium grease. All right, now that we're done with that, we'll just set this down for now. On the rear wheel, there are 2 wheel spacers. They may already be stuck inside your wheel. You might have taken them out, or they might have fallen out. But anyway, the one on the left looks like this, and this is the one that goes on the right. So on my bike, the left one is black, and the right one is silver. I'm not sure if that's always going to be the case, but the one that goes on the left side, or the drive side, is just a little bit taller than the one that goes on the right side, or the brake side. So this is the left, and this is the right. And you just press them into each side of the wheel. All right, this next part's kind of tricky. Basically, you're going to want to lift the wheel up into position so that everything lines up. So you're going to have the hole on the left side of the bike that needs to line up with the wheel spacer and the sprocket on the left side. Then the axle is going to go all the way through. It's going to come out through the wheel spacer on the right side, and then there's the bracket that the brake caliper mounts on, and that has a hole that the axle needs to pass through. So you're going to try to feed it through all of those things, and it's difficult because the wheel's kind of heavy, and so you're trying to manage, the weight of the wheel while you're also feeding this thing through. So just be patient, and you'll get it. All right, finally got that thing on. Now we're just going to put the chain on the sprocket. There we go. All right, so now we've got the axle going all the way through. It's going through the brake caliper bracket, and you can see it's coming through on this side. Now we're just going to put in the axle nut and make sure you have the washer on there. To tighten the rear axle, we're going to hold the left side of the axle with an 8mm hex, and then we're going to tighten the rear axle nut on the right side with a 12mm. All right, so before we get everything locked down and finalized back here, we need to make sure that the chain adjusters are lined up. And so that's just like adjusting the chain. You're going to put a 12mm Allen key in here, and then you rotate it. So the first thing that I did is I tightened this down using the 12mm on this side, holding it with the 8mm on the other side. And I made sure everything was locked down so that everything is compressed. And then I backed it off a bit. All right, so now I'm going to make sure that these are lined up. So to do that, I'm just going to pick, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm going to line up the line with the 5th mark. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then I'm going to do the same on the other side. Those are lined up correctly now. And then I'm going to tighten down these pinch bolts. Not super tight, but just enough that when I tighten down the axle, these adjusters don't start rotating. All right, now I have the 8mm in on the other side, and I'm going to tighten this down. And the torque for the rear axle nut is 100 Newton meters, or 74 foot-pounds. All right, now that that's tight, you'll want to double check to make sure that both of these adjusters are still aligned. It's really important that they're both in line with one another, because if they're not, then your rear wheel isn't going to be aligned relative to the bike. So still it's lined with the 5th tick, and the other side is lined up with the 5th tick. Next, we're going to put the retaining rings back in. And the service manual does say that you should put in new retaining rings when you're doing this, but I don't see any issues with these ones, so I'm just reusing them. All right, so I got that one in, and I'll put the one in on the other side. Okay, the next step is to remount the rear caliper. So I'll clip off this zip tie. And this metal bracket goes behind the bracket that holds the caliper. All right, and then the torque spec for the two caliper bolts is 25 Newton meters or 18 foot-pounds. All right, and the last thing that we need to do over here is tighten down the two nuts on the torque link bar. And the torque spec for those is 35 Newton meters or 26 foot-pounds. All right, the last step is to make sure that your chain tension is right. And I have a separate video on this. I'll have a link up in the corner and down in the description for how to dial in the chain slack. But for now, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to bring it back to the measurement that I took when I first started this process. So because I tightened these pinch bolts, I'm going to loosen these up. Now that those are loose, I'll use the 12 millimeter to rotate the chain adjuster. All right, and then you'll just want to make sure that the chain adjuster on the other side of the bike is lined up with the one on the left side. And once that's good and you have your chain slack properly set, then you'll just tighten down these, the pinch bolts on the back, and I'll have the torque spec below for those. And that's it.